of all, welcome you to this session on obtaining BCS Fellowship and the Charter status. As I say, unfortunately, Keith Taylor can't be with us, so I'm substituting for him. I'm in a lucky position that over the years, because of changes of jobs, I've got CEng, CITP, the old way, not the new way, and Charter Scientist. So can go a little bit through those. Been around on the BCS for a number of years, and chair of sort of Hampshire branch and vice chair of a couple of specialist groups, and very lucky there to have actually got an MBE, which was fantastic. Now, what we'll be talking about is SFIA, which is actually shows the level that you can try to work out where you stand at. The MBCS, CITP, CEng. Now, for those that have got CEng, or those that are aiming to get CEng, please concentrate very firmly when we talk about Eng, particularly if you work with mainland Europe, because although Eng is not understood in the UK, or certainly not widely understood, it does carry a considerable amount of weight, certainly in certain parts of mainland Europe. So this could be very useful to you. Charter Scientist, unfortunately, this has to now be gone through another institution rather than the BCS. And then to finish off with life membership. As I've mentioned, although we're covering quite a lot of material, I've set up a dedicated CIT meeting on the Monday, the 28th of February, and a dedicated CEng meeting on Monday, the 21st of March, both by Russ Friend from the BCS, and he will have assessors with him. So what we're talking about is what you need as far as looking forward for the different levels of charter status and for the levels of fellow. So what we're talking about here is you've got the MBCS, it's approximately level 4. You've got all the chartered ones at level 5, and you're talking about fellowship at 7, although you can be on the 6-7 boundary. So we're going to those a little bit more detail, but it's fairly straightforward once you get your head around it, I'm afraid. So when we're talking about MBCS, well, first of all, level 4, professional approach. Obviously, you've got to commit yourself to the code of practice, etc. So let's just talk a little bit about the SFIA. This was set up by different groups, including the BCS. It's constantly upgraded. Now, to have a look at it in your own time, you go to My BCS, then you click on the careers development at the top, and then you scroll down and go to the Go to Browse SFIA Plus. And then that gives you the whole setup. Now, you'll notice that it's got 7 levels. Level 2 is probably somebody goes into the industry with about maybe A levels, and they're at that sort of stage. Some level 3, probably you've completed a degree, but you've got no work experience. So in other words, you can apply what you've learnt, but you do normally have somebody looking over your shoulder. At level 4, which is the MBCS, you're a professional capable of working on your own without detailed supervision. So that's your MBCS. Now, level 5, you're more like a team leader, or you might be actually doing some mentoring. You might be keeping an eye on those at level 3 when they come in. So you've got an idea roughly where this stands. If you're from academia, level 5, you probably might be a course leader. So you're not only dealing with students, you're also possibly helping other members of staff that you might be giving advice, etc. And as you move right up to level 7, which again is where you're expecting to look much wider. Now, when you think about these levels again, at level 3, when you possibly join, you might understand what your team is doing. Level 4, MBCS, I would expect you to know exactly what's going on in your department. Level 5, more in with what your particular organization is doing, so you have an idea how this all works and sits together. Level 7, you're looking outside your organization, looking at the industry in your particular sector. So it gives you a feel of exactly what's going on and what you're expected to do for the different levels. So this is a little bit of the SFIA. So you've got different sections, and as you can see, the sections, they have the different levels. So if you're doing research, it could be from somebody that comes in at the low level, which is basically A level, fairly right up to level 4, your MBCS, level 5, your charter status, but there isn't a level 7 on this one. Okay, that's okay. But when you actually look through to some of the other ones, you will actually find some of these actually go through, such as governance. This is purely at level 6, level 7. So in other words, you're basically at the sort of the fellow status. Now, there's also on these cells, there's a lot of information about each one of those. You can actually find out for this particular cell or what prior knowledge you would expect, what sort of qualifications you would expect, what sort of tasks you would do, what sort of CPD you would actually go through. So if we go through some of the other sections and the actual subsections that come off it. So you're going right through from people management right through to stakeholder management, sales, marketing. If we take one, for instance, which was sustainability. Now this happens to be available at level 4, MBCS, level 5, chartered, and it's also available at level 6. So you can actually see from these, yes, you've got information about the previous experience at each of those levels, the prior knowledge and skills that you would expect it to have, and the education background you'd expect it to have. Also, you'll have information about the tasks, what you would do, and how you will move on. This is very useful because if you want to move up grades into different levels, then you can find out what you would expect it to be capable of doing at that next level. Now, if we look at, again, sustainability, I've just picked out something from the CPD. So you've got a selection of things that you would expect it to do. So at chartered level, probably some pro bono, unpaid activities that possibly linked into the computing, professional skills, helping with maybe with some of the specialist groups, etc. You'll also have extramural studies that could be nothing whatsoever to do with computing. So you've got a whole range of things. You might be involved in deputizing if you're a leader. You might be getting more involved in some of the other sections. So there's a whole variety of things that you can link in with a particular cell at a particular level. Now, when we think about the chartered professional, so we moved up from level 4 to level 5. So we're talking about the CITP. Now here you're looking, first of all, to check, do you reach the barrier that you reached level 5? What about the assessment? Now the assessment is where you produce a written report, basically an extended CV, and then you move on, if all is well, into an interview with the 2 assessors and a presentation, 10-minute presentation. So you've got the 3 barriers to deal with. And this is fine. So, but don't forget, one of the most important things at this stage is the assessment. And when you're writing about it, you've got to write about not what your department does, not what your team does, but what did you do? It's no good saying, we did such and such. It's actually what the assessors want to know is, what did you personally do? What was your responsibility? What was your tasks? You might have mentioned the whole group, what the group are doing, but it's what you do. This is what matters. And it's the same thing with your CVs when we come to talk about this one. It's actually the most relevant thing. Think about who's going to read it and why they're going to read it. So the assessment, they actually want to find out your job. So your current resume, your statement of what you've been doing. Again, when you start it, there's obviously payments and you need supporters. We'll come back to the supporters, but basically you're looking for supporters of your level, or even better, higher than your level, that can confirm your technical knowledge. Now, when I was actually doing some interviewing this, somebody very kindly put forward their local vicar as one of their supporters, which would be great if we were looking for information about him, but at that stage we were actually trying to find out the information of his technical skills. So you have to think a little bit about, are you choosing the right supporter? And also somebody actually came up and said, this great guy, he works for me, and I'm sure he can actually be my supporter. No, it's not. That's not a good choice of supporter. You want ideally above your level, if not certainly at the same level. So we're talking about the CV, your qualities, your job, your responsibility. When we talk about list of qualifications, think about actually your highest qualifications. You're not really interested in what you did in primary school, secondary school, etc. What is important possibly is to almost think in reverse order. What is your highest qualification? And think about distinctions and awards. And also think about hobbies and social activities, because they could tell quite a lot about yourself, particularly possibly you've been in competitive sports. So when we're talking about the initial assessment, we're looking very much at responsibility, technical skills, business skills. So when we think about the role that you're doing, let's take that in a bit more detail. Do you have working under broad direction? In other words, you could be a team leader, but there might be a head of department that actually basically directs where the teams go. It could be a head of department directs actually what the course supervisors do in an academic environment. So very much level 5, you're expected to be very much self-reliant, coming up with ideas to deal with things and actually to help to monitor others. Influence, well, yes, you're building up your influence, you're allocating resources. Complexity, yes, you're working through it, and particularly understanding the relationship between your own specialism and the wider requirements of your organization. So we're moving up into your business skills. You're looking again, responsibility, specialization, particularly as it says, take up-to-date skills. Maybe you're mentoring colleagues because you're now a leader at the level 5. And also expected to know about relevant legislation. As well in the business skills, particularly communication is quite important. So moving on to a quick summary of the CITP. You've got to be working at level 5 or above. You've got to have basically this range that we talked about. You've got to talk about what you did, and you have to provide this information in a written form. And if that's successful, then you're going through to the interview, 2 assessors, and you're then you're required to do a presentation, a maximum of 10 minutes. By the way, all of these interviews can be done remotely. Now, you've now got, hopefully, if all is successful, CITP. Now, that CITP lasts you for basically forever, but the currency of that CITP begins to wear away on a year-by-year basis as technology itself and everything else changes. So there's a certificate of current competence. So after 5 years, you actually, again, by a written submission with evidence and interview if necessary, you're proving that you've kept yourself up to date. And then after a further 5 years, again, you have an upgraded certificate of current competence, and a further 5 years you repeat it. So this is a basic system. Now, to find out a little bit more about the CITP, put in your diary 28th of February, and that would be looking at CITP and COCC, the certificate of current competence. As I said, you've got a fair idea about it, so you can plan out the sort of things that you want to watch out for in that webinar and the questions that you might want to ask. Now, coming on to another chartered form. Now, this is for the Engineering Council. Now, again, as I said with the CITP, we've got a specialist webinar on getting CEng, and this will be on Monday, the 21st of March. So again, those aren't actually on the website yet, but they will be on the Hampshire website, certainly within a couple of weeks, but the dates are fixed. So when we're talking about the Engineering Council criteria, what we've got there is you're looking at your qualifications. Are they appropriate? You're looking at, are you at level 5? And then you've got the interview. Well, that's fine. So that's great. And you think, well, this looks fairly similar. Are you at level 5? Okay, we've talked about that one. Do you do engineering methods in the job? So in other words, if you were designing, maybe designing software, the chances are you would satisfy it. Now, these are the questions that you might want to bring up on that 21st of March. You're talking about, are you committed to a professional standard? Yes, that's standard for actually everybody at Chartered. Now, one of the things is you see IEng and CEng. They are very similar, but with slight differences. Both are really looking at sort of the engineering aspect, but CEng is probably got maybe a master's degree as well as a bachelor's, whereas an IEng probably might be a bachelor's degree. Also, the type of work they do is slightly different. So although that you say they have different academic entries in it, the work that they do is a little bit different as well. Again, much more detail of that on the 21st of March. So we go into a lot more detail exactly how that varies. And if you go into the Engineering Council specification on their website, then that actually gives you more information. You have the interviews, as we said, with CITP, 2 assessors, maybe up to an hour, and usually online. You need to provide particularly the evidence relating to the competences that they're interested in. So what we're talking about here, again, is what you did, not what the team did, not what the company did, what you did, what your role was, what your responsibility was. And this is the one thing that it is very important. Now, chartered engineer, they are particularly interested in the management side. So when you're thinking about your CV, when you're thinking about the courses that you've been on, we're not just talking about technical courses, but also more the soft skill courses, the management courses, dispute resolution courses that you've been on. Those need to be in there. And those are things that the Engineering Council are particularly interested in seeing in addition to your technical ones. So they are very, very useful to keep full records of those. Just going through a little bit more of the chartered engineer. We're talking about innovation, engineering, we're talking about leadership, professional standards, working in a sort of safe, particularly safe systems. And you are required to carry out CPD. In fact, as all member of the BCS, you should actually be keeping your CV up to date. You should be actually doing some sort of continuous professional development, CPD. Now, with the Engineering Council, you don't have to submit it on an annual basis, but the organizations that you acquire this chartered engineer from, which in our case would be BCS, will actually contact a selection of the people with CEng and say, okay, we'd like to see details of your CPD that you've done during this last year. Now, CITP, that's very much a computing system. CEng, it applies right across the engineering, most of the engineering societies. So you could get your CEng through the BCS, through some of the maritime institutes, the aeronautic institutes. Again, anything that satisfies basically the engineering will probably be able to give you the option of applying for CEng. So a CEng is worth the same regardless of which of the professional bodies you actually acquired it through. Now, we talked about you needed qualifications. Well, it said qualifications, you needed a bachelor's or maybe a bachelor's and plus a master's. Well, that doesn't apply to everybody, particularly if you've been working in the industry for a long time, you've got a lot of experience. So that are what we call individual routes. Now, these individual routes, you still have to reach the level 5 and you still got the interviews, but you can either produce a technical report or you can produce an experimental evidence. In other words, evidence of exactly what you've done to actually prove that you have got this sort of knowledge and skills. So really for this one, for an individual route, this technical report or the evidential route is actually very important. So this is something that you have to watch out for. Out of the two of them, I would recommend the evidence rather than the technical report, but that's just pure personal preference. If it's a technical one, you've actually write a synopsis, you send it in, it's reviewed. They actually then say, yes, this seems to be reasonable. You've got 6 months then to produce it. It goes to assessors. And then again, you go through the interview system, etc. Now, what can be particularly people working in the industry and the computing industry might find it better to look for the evidence process. So this is very much the knowledge and understanding. Now, the particular areas they're interested in building up is something within the science, mathematics, the design, the engineering practice. Now you think, well, I don't necessarily do any science or mathematics in my job. But if you think about it in the widest interpretation, yes, you probably do. And this is some of the issues that, if this is something that you're interested in, and particularly if you were going to follow this evidence route, these are some of the questions you need to start thinking about, ready for the webinar on the 21st of March, because this is where you might want to actually discuss these in more detail. So you're submitting this written report, but very much about your experience. And this will be assessed and it will be read, and you will go with the interview and with the 10-minute presentation. By the way, the 10-minute presentation on all these is actually limited to 10 minutes. So 10 minutes isn't very long if you've got to try and explain the key issues of what you've done in your career. Now, when we talked about this career-based assessment, we said you've got the 2 assessors. If by any chance there's any difference, then they bring it in and bring in a 3rd one. So, but this is actually probably the best route. Now, if you've got chartered engineer, CEng, or if you're planning to get it, I would strongly suggest you think about a European engineer, EUREng. Now, in the UK, it's not widely understood, but if you deal with mainland Europe, certainly some of the other parts of the world, it is rated very highly. Now, this could be particularly useful if you deal with the mainland Europe. So for an example, one of the interviews that we did for somebody that's going for a professional BCS membership and CEng, at the end of the interview, you know, how you chat a little bit and said, have you thought about, and we mentioned, had you thought about European engineer, EUREng? And the guy actually went ahead, got his professional status, he got his CEng, and he went ahead and got his EUREng. By the way, to do that, you're actually basically submitting basically your CV. But you can be summoned to an interview. I think it's in Brussels or Geneva, but I don't actually know anybody that's actually been summoned for the interview stage. They take the interviewing and the process of acquiring your CEng from whichever institute you took it from to cover a variety of things. So they're sort of just checking up on that. So EUREng, it's different. Instead of actually like MBCS, CEng, it goes behind the name. EUREng goes in front. So you could be EUREng John Smith, EUREng Dr. John Smith, EUREng Professor John Smith. So it goes in front. And if you actually go into the BCS website, again, they've got details of actually about the EUREng. So you're talking about, you're encouraged to have some skill in a foreign non-English language, but at the moment it's not a requirement. So it's a good reason to actually get in quick. Now the EUREng, it's from Feeney that runs it. You get this title, as we've said, and again, the EUREng has its own application form, which is a straightforward one. Unfortunately, it's about £200 to apply, but there again, the actual cost of keeping it up to date is about £40 every about 5 years, so it's a very low cost. Now, we've talked about CITP. We've talked about CEng. Now, CEng is an annual fee, by the way, and I think this year it was something like £60 or £70. Now we come on, £50. We've come to the Science Council, and that has an annual fee, and that's around about £60. Now, to get charter scientists, you could do it through the BCS, but then a few years ago, in fact, when I was actually on the trustee board, that's when we actually voted to actually come out of the Science Council. So we would actually, BCS would no longer produce the charter scientists. The reason for this was there were so few charter scientists in the BCS So the numbers that were being covered for was minute compared with the sort of cost of actually being involved with it. Now, charter scientist, you have the qualifications that's got to be accepted under the sort of science section. You've got to have your level 5 within that sort of general science section. And again, you've got the interview. The qualification is actually rated rather important on this case. So what are we looking for? Well, certainly, are you looking at working at level 5? Working in science or IT, computer science? Yes, you probably satisfy it. It depends exactly what your work is. And do they have business and other professional skills? Yes. Now, the academic side of this is usually looking for something like master's, because remember CEng, they were looking for possibly first degree and secondary, similarly for the chartered scientist. But again, there are options if you don't have the academic qualifications. But do you use scientific methods? Do you actually operate at professional level? Do you work effectively as a team? Do you have business skills? Do you keep CPD? Are you keeping yourself up to date? Health and safety, environmental issues, again, all of the things that you would expect, really, to be honest, of any chartered scientist to be able to follow. Whether you're going for a chartered scientist, chartered engineer, or CITP, chartered IT practitioner. So, as well as the chartered scientist, as I said, it's not through the BCS. Now, I wanted to retain my chartered scientist. So in fact, I had to actually join another professional body in addition to the BCS. So, but again, there is the sort of the information about it. Now, one thing that's a little bit different from the chartered scientists is that each year, the PPD, this is their professional development scheme, the CPD. What you have to do is you have to submit this every year to prove you've kept up to date. So what you do is, in fact, I actually did mine yesterday, and it was actually what I got up to and plan to do in 2022, and what I got up to as far as the professional development in 2021. So aims and plans over the next year, sort of a paragraph about that. You come in a mini CV, and then the bit that took a little bit longer is you actually give examples of the different sort of activities you've done. So you've got work-based ones, acquiring new skills, writing articles, papers. You've got the professional activities, so as being involved possibly within BCS boards, or branches, specialist groups, etc. You've got your formal, your education. Did you attend conferences? You've got your self-directed learning, books you've read, articles you read, and you've got then the other voluntary work that's got nothing whatsoever to do with IT, or it could be totally separate. But again, you're breaking it up. You're supposed to have activities in at least 2 of these 5 sections, and usually you'll have 3 or 4 possibly. But there's a number of hours, again, you're expected to actually be able to account for. So it took me about 2.5 hours yesterday to do this. So at the moment, it's not required for CITP. It could be required, but not quite so formal as this for CEng, but it is required for chartered scientist. So now on to the grade 7 fellowship of the BCS. By the way, a fellowship across all of the professional bodies are roughly at the same level. And normally this is the same sort of thing is being asked for. But this is not a charter status. This is definitely a level 7, or it could be a 6 and 7. Now there's 3 sections: seniority, authority, and eminence. You don't have to actually be at level 7 for all of these. You could actually have a sort of a combination, or you could be very much in one. We're coming to those in a minute and explain exactly what we mean by those. But what you're looking for is definitely the level 7, and it's definitely one of these. Now, with all of these, you also have the usual interview that pops in as well. So let's actually have a little look at these in more detail. We've got eminence, authority, seniority. And as I said, we've got the CV. Now, whatever you're doing it, you're going to have to submit your CV. Make sure it actually is giving the most recent experience first. Don't give lots of your first early jobs that you've done. Concentrate on the important things. And you can also mention, and also your earlier career. As far as your education, again, the most recent, the highest level is important. And don't forget, it's what you did, not what the team did. So if you're writing something about it, it's no we, it's I. I did this. This was my report that I produced, or that I produced a draft, in which case it was then checked out by. So if we're talking about eminence, are you an expert in your field? Do you have a record of maybe published work, public speaking? If you're an academic, probably you would actually have quite a list of publications. Public speaking, maybe, do you actually give a lot of webinars? Are you give this on a regular basis? Are you brought in to speak on panels? Possibly communicating very much to the sort of wider areas. How about authority? Well, are you actually on any key committees? Maybe we said that at level 5, you might have got yourself involved with the BCS, maybe a branch or specialist group. Maybe at level 7, you might be actually on some of the national or international committees. You don't have to be, but you can be. So it gives you a sort of area of what it could be. On a technical one, you might have patents. So there's a whole variety of things. Don't look at this and say, oh my goodness, I can't actually do this. You can. Definitely you can. But what you have to do is think about what you need to do and try and fill in any gaps that you need to deal with. So what about seniority? What we're talking about there, maybe if you manage a department, maybe 50 people, fantastic. Maybe a budget, the size of the budget that you manage, or you've got a major influence on. If you're a senior lecturer, being responsible for various courses, teaching at maybe degree level, maybe your principal or senior principal level, or higher at the civil service. Again, these are just ways of identifying. Don't forget, you do not have to satisfy all three, but you can have combinations. You will need supporters. Normally your supporters are expected to be FBCS. And that you want people that can comment on your experience and say, this is definitely something that I can confirm. So this is actually quite good. Again, preferably not working for you. So at the same level, or better still, higher. The same thing as when you're looking for your supporters for all the other levels. So recapping on the fellowship, are you at level 7? What about the number of people? Seniority? Or what about authority? Or what about eminence? Or do they have a combination of all of them? So again, there is lots of possibilities. And when you're doing it, it's quite useful to talk to somebody that can probably have a look at your CV, just a CV, because you want to give it in the form that they want to see it, giving the information they want. So it's not only just you worked at this, what you need to know is what did you do at this? What was your role? Talk to somebody that's got FBCS or to the BCS, and they can give you guidance on this. So this is actually quite useful, because normally, certainly people I've normally gone back and said, well, I suggest that you actually rewrite it because, and then maybe have a little Zoom chat. And you say, well, why didn't you put this on? Because this is fantastic, but you didn't put it in. And there's very often people have got marvelous, wonderful things that they've done, and they just haven't thought about putting it in. They said, would anybody interested? And yes, they would be. So, do take advice if you want it. Now, finally, you're relieved to know, the last thing on the list of things to talk about, life membership. Now, as you get closer towards retiring, and if you decide that you want to stick with the BCS for a number of years, after retiring, and hopefully you would, because you've got a tremendous amount of skills and knowledge, which are very, very useful to be able to pass on. But when you retire, you begin to think, well, is it worth the money? Well, this is where you're looking at the typical cost. Don't forget, these always change, but a cost of what you pay for 1 year. So you can work out shall we say, how many years do you expect to actually possibly make use of the BCS, or to not so much make use, maybe to be able to help to contribute to. And then you can say, well, if you're in your 60s, maybe at the cost of a fellowship rate, well, I'm certainly planning to be involved for at least 3 years. I'm definitely going to make a profit if I turn to MBCS. Now, if you decide to leave the BCS, well, I'm sorry, you don't get your money back. If you upgrade and you've got maybe a life membership at MBCS rate and you upgrade to FBCS, then you just actually work it out and they work out what the difference is. And so you can just upgrade it. But you do have your annual fees for chartered engineer. You have your annual fees for chartered scientist, but not just for the straight CITP. But don't forget, with the CITP, every 5 years, you do need to either stick with the CITP or increase your certificate of competence. So again, all the information. So basically, as we talked about professional development, we've got your communication, you've got your business, you've got your innovation, and we're talking about the chartered, and we're talking about the fellow. So hopefully, I hope this has been useful. This is the final slide. And what we're talking about there is, I suggest that you look at the SFIA Plus, not only try and work out roughly where you are. Don't worry if you're not there. What your job might be is a combination across 2 or 3 sections. And don't forget that SFIA Plus changes the whole time. Changes every few years, it's different. Look towards what's expected at the next level up, because you can see where you're going. Even in fact, if you want to change direction a little bit. This can be, particularly when you're looking at, say, maybe qualifications for the next level, this could be very useful at your next appraisal. Update your CV. Don't forget on what you did. Think about the technical, and don't forget the management and the soft skills as well as the technical. Make notes of all your presentations, publications, webinars you presented, your involvement with committees, those with the BCS and not the BCS. And also make a note in your diary of, if you're interested in the CITP and the chartered engineer, then a little bit more detail will be given, or rather much more detail and a lot more questions answered on the 28th of February and 21st of March. They're not on the Hampshire website yet, but they will be. So at that stage, we'll come through and I'll stop the recording.